Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the woods of Alberta, Canada, to a place aptly nicknamed Crying Canyon. It is located on the eastern slope of the Canadian Rockies, and the alpine zone is guarded by granite peaks reaching almost 9,000 feet in elevation. Beneath the granite peaks are thick forests of pine, fir, and spruce trees, growing so close together that they look like a beautiful green carpet when you look across the valley. There seem to be more white-tailed deer here than humans in nearby Calgary, and moose are plentiful too. If you look closely toward the mountaintops, you might see mountain goats as well as Canadian Bighorn Sheep as they perform their gravity-defying ballet along the cliffs. There are cougars, black bears, and wolves here, but the grizzly bears present the most danger of all. 32-year-old Jeremy Evans was raised in Calgary, which is only a stone's throw away. He was a meat packer and an avid outdoorsman. He had been hunting and fishing nearly all of his life and spent about 2 months of each year in the mountains pursuing his passions. He most enjoyed bow hunting, but this year he hoped to bag a big old ram, and that is best done with a hunting rifle. Jeremy was married to the love of his life, Joyce, and they had recently welcomed their first child into their family. She was his first girlfriend, and he was her first boyfriend. They had been with each other ever since they began dating in high school, and were custom-made for each other. Joyce was a bona fide marine biologist and well-educated. She was a city girl, mostly, and Jeremy, her perfect complement by contrast. Joyce was still on maternity leave, but passed her time while volunteering at a local nonprofit when she wasn't busy taking care of the baby and Jeremy. Jeremy had planned on a dream sheep hunt for this fall and had put the time into researching locations and strategies to be successful. His meticulous planning for his hunts bordered on obsession, but his wife humored and supported him. Jeremy's sheep hunt was coming up soon, and he'd planned a quick scouting trip to find out just how much success awaited him in those dark forests and granite peaks. At 3 a.m. on August 17th of 2017, Jeremy hopped into his pickup truck and pulled out of his driveway. He'd carefully loaded his backpack and all the supplies he would need for what he planned to be a 3-day backcountry scouting trip for a trophy ram. Hiking into where he wanted to go would take an ordinary hunter a few days, so Jeremy sped this process up a bit by riding his mountain bike, which he placed in the bed of his truck. Jeremy knew from prior seasons that day hunters would hit the areas nearest the roads early in the morning, and that pressure would drive the sheep back to where he planned to hunt. He'd planned to set up base camp about 8 miles back up the trail, hoping that the head start on the day hunters would bring him success in his ram hunt. After driving for 3 hours to the trailhead, Jeremy slipped his backpack over his shoulders and pedaled up the hill. The foliage blurred by as an excitement of fulfilling the plans and goals he'd been working on started to take shape. His legs churned like pistons, driving him up and down each slope of the trail. Jeremy was so familiar with this area that he knew where the usuals would camp. He knew about 4 miles into his journey he would pass a sheepherder's tent with an older gentleman sipping coffee out front. But this time the old man was missing. Jeremy energetically zipped past a couple of men, possibly hikers, but maybe hunters, doing some scouting as well. They were on foot and taken aback a bit by seeing someone riding a mountain bike in this area. They stared at him as he passed, but he simply focused on finding the turn in the trail leading him to the more remote part of the canyon. This part of the canyon is so steep and rugged that few people make it back here. That is part of what drew Jeremy to this location. The ruggedness and solitude were exactly what he wanted. He brought along his binoculars in his backpack as well as his bear spray and high-powered hunting rifle. He carefully navigated the crumbling slopes of a few drainages and emerged to the open face of the mountain. The trees stopped suddenly, creating a panoramic view of the hillside. Jeremy picked his way slowly around the hill, glassing for sheep as he went. It wasn't long before his hard work paid off as a small herd of sheep appeared on the hillside opposite of him. Jeremy leaned up on his handlebars and used them as a steady rest to get a good look at the herd. He watched for several minutes, examining each individual and searching the males for that full curl set of horns so desired by a sheep hunter. As he adjusted his position a bit, he saw a small brown blur run across the trail just in front of him. He was far too experienced to wonder what it was, and instantly knew it was a grizzly cub. The most foreboding part was that where there is a grizzly cub, there is always a very protective and angry grizzly mama nearby. Fearful and profane words briefly flashed through his mind.
He knew he was danger close to this cub, and that what came next could be disastrous for him. He knew if he was lucky, he may be able to get to his bear spray, still stowed in his backpack, now leaning on his mountain bike. As Jeremy bent down and opened the flap to his backpack, a few things he neglected to do flashed through his mind. He now regretted not loading his firearm and leaving his bear spray at the bottom of his pack instead of clipping it to his hip. Experience told him that missing these details is bad, but usually not crucial. His experience today would reveal just how crucial every little detail is when you're confronted by a grizzly bear. Before he could get his hand around the handle of his bear spray bottle, an ominous crack of a twig snapping just behind his right shoulder provided a clue to the question that plagued him. As he turned his head, he could see the sow grizzly in midair, her left paw outstretched toward him. The whites of her eyes conveyed rage, and her wide-open mouth clearly presented her violent intentions. Jeremy reacted lightning fast by grabbing his bike frame and positioning it between himself and the sow. As a hunter myself, I've played the mental gymnastics of the what-if game. If a bear surprised me, I would hold my bow out like a shield while stabbing with my arrows like giant daggers. It is kind of like the famous quote of Mike Tyson's, "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face." Jeremy's plan actually seemed to work a bit. The sow's head went right through the frame of his bike, and her claws got stuck in the spokes of his wheels. As she struggled to remove herself from his bike, Jeremy held his backpack between them. I'm sure that he hoped that the confusion wrought by getting tangled up in the bike would cause the sow to retreat and reconsider her attack plan, but he could tell by the way she looked at him that that was not going to happen. With the bike frame wrapped around her neck, she again charged toward him. It was all he had at the time, so Jeremy used his backpack to crack the grizzly over the head several times. He used it as a shield to push her jaws away from him, time and time again. She was rapacious and determined to get to him, though. The protective sow somehow got the frame of Jeremy's backpack into her mouth, and the two had a very mismatched and brief episode of tug-of-war. Each time, Jeremy managed to somehow keep hold of his backpack. She bit through his hands and his backpack frame, while he fought her off for a few minutes. The sow then took a few steps back and shook off the bike frame. She turned away from Jeremy, appearing to go find her cub. As she backed up, Jeremy also backed up, all the while scrambling through his backpack, trying to get to his rifle. For no apparent reason, the sow spun on her heels. She came charging back toward Jeremy with renewed fervor. Jeremy hadn't yet got control of his rifle, so he threw his backpack at the sow. Thinking it better if he fled up the slope, then used the height to leap into a tree for escape, Jeremy sprinted as fast as he could. His jump into a spruce tree only granted him about 7 feet of separation from a sow grizzly probably nearly that height on her hind legs. As he pulled himself up into the tree, he felt the claws of the sow wrap around his right leg just before he could lift it out of her range. As she pulled his right leg toward her mouth, Jeremy powerlessly watched as her mouth opened wide and she plunged her huge canines into the flesh behind his knee. He braced to feel the flood of pain race through his body, but felt nothing. The sow jerked Jeremy out of the spruce tree and slammed him onto the ground at its base. He crawled under the spruce tree boughs to try to hide and wrapped himself around its trunk. His strategy worked, until it didn't. The sow was clawing at Jeremy while he clung to the spruce trunk, but could not get a good hold of him, at least not a good enough one to pull him out from under the tree. Jeremy was sheltered partially by the branches of the spruce tree, but she managed to push her head close enough to him to bite into the flesh of his left side. She jerked him out with such force that he could not stay wrapped around the base of the spruce and flew about 6 feet through the air. Now at this time, Jeremy weighed 250 pounds and was not a fat 250. He was strong and fit, and this sow not only broke the grip of his body curled around the spruce trunk, but also threw him a distance of 6 feet. Let that sink in for just a moment. As quickly as Jeremy impacted the ground, the angry sow was standing over the top of him. He lay curled into a ball on his right side, trying to protect his vital organs, head and neck, all at once. He tried to resist her as she pushed her open mouth around part of his face, but her power and speed were overwhelming. One of her upper canines punched its way through the inside corner of Jeremy's left eye socket, completely crushing his nose as it tore its path. At the same time, her other upper canine pierced Jeremy's flesh of the outside of his left eye. As she closed her jaws, the bones of Jeremy's face crunched and popped as she pulled the flesh away from the bone. Having his face torn from his skull, Jeremy decided that playing dead or non-threatening wasn't working. He rolled over onto his back and started throwing blows with the sow. He poked his fingers into her eyes, pulled her ears, and jabbed his fingers up into her nose. He was trying anything he could to get her to back off. His desperate strategies weren't enough to deter the sow, as she shook her head to break his grip and opened her mouth wide toward his face once again. As quick as he could, Jeremy plunged his left fist into her mouth and slid it past her leathery, scarred tongue. He opened his fist and grabbed her tongue as hard as he could. The sow immediately started gagging and choking. She turned toward Jeremy's left and pawed him with her hind paws while trying to get his fist from her mouth. As Jeremy grasped the bear's tongue with his left hand, he attempted to push her off of him with his right. His hand slipped along her fur to an area with thinner fur covering it, and he knew it to be her lower abdomen. He felt around and grabbed onto what he thought must be testicles and squeezed as hard as he could. The sow let out a sound reminiscent of a pig's squeal. It was high-pitched, painful, and had an element of surprise to it. The sow bucked and twisted, trying to get away from Jeremy's grip on such sensitive parts. After he released his grip, the sow ran into the bush and disappeared. Jeremy regained his feet and stumbled to his backpack. He knew he was in big trouble with such debilitating wounds. From his backpack he pulled his cell phone and immediately clicked a few photos of the damage the sow had done to his face. He grew concerned that he could see very large portions of his face missing, misaligned, or disfigured. His face was tattered and torn. Parts of his flesh dangled from unknown previous positions. He pulled his backpack close to him and gripped his rifle. Jeremy was so adrenalized that he even thought he could continue looking for sheep, but it wasn't long before it wore off and the pain set in. He began assessing his other injuries and noted that his right leg would not work properly. His tendons that operated his joints had been severed in several key places. On his left side, he was missing a bare-mouth-sized piece of flesh, and the same on his inner thigh. As he loaded his rifle, due to his injuries, he placed the butt of the stock on the ground with the barrel across his left shoulder as he placed rounds in the gun's clip with his right hand. Suddenly his hands went limp, and he heard and felt crunching. The sow had returned from behind Jeremy as he was distracted, loading his rifle. She'd crept up on him and bit onto the width of the back of his skull and crushed it. Jeremy could hear loud pops and crunches as his skull gave way to the enormous force of the sow's canines and jaws. Jeremy could see the scenery shifting as the sow worked to pull him up the hill. He was in a seated position and leaned against her front paws as she rested for a moment. The sow then reached up with her right paw and dug her claws into Jeremy's face, at his nose, and at the corner of his mouth. She peeled the skin of his cheek away, up to his right eyeball, and severed his ear completely. As she tore at his flesh with her claws, she continually bit at his face and skull, cracking and breaking bone. Jeremy stared into her mouth as she pulled chunks of flesh from his face. He started to feel a sense of peace come over him. He knew he couldn't live through all of this damage. As soon as he began to give in to death and accept his fate, the sow changed positions and dropped him onto his back. Whatever part of Jeremy's body that the bite to the back of his head caused to go out of whack, being dropped onto his back put it back in place. Feeling returned to his arms and hands. He could move them again. His vision was filled with something dark and blurry. He didn't know it at this time, but both of his eyes had been dislocated during this portion of the attack. Jeremy's head was now near the sow's abdomen, and her head was toward his feet. In one last burst of fight, Jeremy again grasped onto the portion of the bear's anatomy that he thought was testicles and began trying to tear them off. As he did this, he wrapped his legs around the neck of the sow. This inflicted obvious and tremendous pain on the bear, and she began bucking like a bronco, trying to separate Jeremy from her. The sow was in so much pain that she vomited and defecated, while she rolled on the ground trying to shake herself from Jeremy's grasp. She was squealing like a pig and dragging him through the grass while trying to rub him off of her. At this point, Jeremy once again let go of the sow's sensitive anatomy and watched as she squealed and barked her way down the mountain in the opposite direction. Hoping that this time the sow would stay gone, but nearly completely blinded, Jeremy searched around with his hands, trying to locate his rifle. He knew she had dragged him uphill from his rifle and backpack a ways, so he crawled down to where he found the trail. Then he felt around and located his backpack, and finally his rifle. He was frantic and terrified the sow would return, and felt around to find his clip. His vision was so blurry that he couldn't tell what he was looking at, but spotted a dark linear object on the ground. He bent over to pick up what he thought was his clip, but turned out to be his severed mustache and goatee. Close to that, he picked up a piece of his ear and other parts of his scalp. Then he found the clip to his rifle. He shoved the clip into his rifle and fired 3 quick shots at a large dark mystery object nearby, just in case it was the sow. Jeremy was desperate, and certain there was no way he was going to live through this last part of the attack. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket and began to type a message to his wife. He knew he had no cell service, but thought of it as a type of message in a bottle that she may be able to receive someday after his death. Jeremy knew he had about 14 miles of rugged and difficult country to cross just to get back to his truck. As he tried to stand, his right leg gave out. The portion of flesh the sow had torn from his leg rendered it useless. He looked down to see the hole the bear had torn in his side, open and bleeding. He had a moment of confusion and conflict. He wasn't sure if he should fight the inevitable any longer. There was simply no way he could make it out of this alive. He placed the butt of his rifle against the ground and tried to end his own suffering, but his rifle wouldn't fire. Amazingly, once the barrel cleared his head, it went off with a thunderous clap, like a giant judge rendering a verdict. He decided to take that as a sign that he needed to try to get out. Jeremy decided that if he made it easier to locate his body after his death, that would be an achievable goal. He aimed to make it as close to the trailhead as possible. Before he started to crawl, he took the severed pieces of his flesh he had picked up and placed them flesh-side down on the wounds of his face and skull. He then wrapped his entire head in a sweater to hold the pieces in place. He used the arms of the sweater to reposition his jaw, which was hanging from his face. Determined to make it closer to his truck somehow, Jeremy staggered to his feet, but his right leg buckled, and he collapsed. This process happened over and over as Jeremy continually tried to walk down the steep trail. At one point in the journey, Jeremy lost his footing and tumbled several hundred feet down the trail, landing on a small group of boulders. He'd come to a stop in the creek at the bottom of the drainage. He was exhausted and in excruciating pain. Jeremy had decided that he would give up and wait to die in his sleep. Jeremy pulled his cell phone from his pocket and tapped on the screen. It looked like a cloudy jumble of images and letters. He just wanted to listen to some music as he drifted off to sleep and randomly clicked on a song on his playlist. When his little daughter was sick or scared, Jeremy would play the song Baby Shark for her on his phone. He'd saved it there so he could do just that, and now he drew inspiration to continue to fight for his life from this song he shared with his daughter so often. Jeremy crawled to the top of the drainage and tumbled down the other side. He picked himself back up at the bottom and crawled up the far side of the next drainage as well, all while the song Baby Shark was stuck on repeat. He mostly crawled, but managed to stumble several miles out to the trail junction, driven by the memories he'd had of his 6-month-old baby girl. About 7 miles into his escape, Jeremy approached the sheepherder's tent. He hoped that the two gentlemen he had passed earlier today on his mountain bike would be there. Jeremy's left eye dangled onto his cheek, and in order to see out of it, he had to tip his head back very far. He glanced about, hoping that someone would come to investigate the noise he made, but there was nobody there. He broke down and cried at the realization. Just past the sheepherder's tent, Jeremy had to stumble down another slope. He tumbled over 10 feet and landed in the creek, completely submerged. Undaunted, he crawled out of the creek like a zombie, still focused on his mission to survive and see his wife and daughter one more time. He crawled and stumbled down the trail to what he'd hoped to be his next chance of finding help. He staggered to the outfitter's tents pitched along the trail and searched everywhere for anyone to help him, but nobody was at this camp either. He couldn't believe no one was there and trashed the place looking for some kind of means of communications, a beacon or a satellite phone. Jeremy found a locked cabinet and thought it had to have something valuable in it. When he tried to pry off the lock, his hands wouldn't work, so he pulled it from the wall and smashed it on the floor. Once opened, he could see it contained only canned foods and a pocket knife and a case that resembled a cell phone. Every time he crossed another waypoint, it seemed his journey got longer and more difficult. By this point, Jeremy had several bear-mouth-sized bites removed from various parts of his body, most of the flesh slashed away from his face, as well as his skull crushed from both the front and back sides. He'd walked right around 11 miles from the initial attack site and fallen down the downhill portions of almost every hill he'd crossed doing so. He'd managed to stumble his way toward camps he expected to be occupied by people, only to have his hopes dashed each time he arrived. He was too tired to continue. Whether it was exhaustion, hopelessness, or just getting ready to die, Jeremy found a sleeping bag and rolled it out next to a wood stove at the camp. Before he lay down, he decided he would write a letter to the camp owners. He sat down at the table with paper and pen, but as he leaned over the table, his blood dripped onto the paper. Seeing some paper towels and toilet paper nearby, he took them in his hands and wrapped his entire head in the absorbent sheets. Somehow he found some athletic tape used to bandage sprained ankles of hunters and hikers, and wrapped that around his head as well. He then reached up to his dislocated and gashed jaw, which had hung from his face toward the left side of his body to this point. Jeremy pushed a few severed folds of skin back in place and pressed his jaw back into its socket. It clicked back into place, and he was overjoyed to be able to speak again. He finished off wrapping his entire head with the toilet paper, paper towels, and tape, and continued his note writing. A picture of exactly what Jeremy wrote and photos of his injuries would not pass YouTube standards, so I've posted them on my Patreon account linked below. I will urge you not to look at these pictures if you are sensitive or squeamish. They're actually some of the worst I've ever seen. Jeremy's deformed and damaged beyond human recognition, and you view them at your own discretion. While Jeremy penned his letter, he squirted juice from juice boxes into his mouth. This restored his energy, and he felt like he could make the 5 miles remaining to his truck. He had 5 remaining juice boxes, and that would be just enough for 1 for each mile. As Jeremy dragged his stiffened right leg for 4 more miles, he came upon a set of twin boulders and knew he was nearly back to his vehicle. He squished the contents of the last juice box into his mouth and kissed his hands before placing one on each of the twin boulders. He knew he would now make it back to his truck. The last mile was probably the easiest for Jeremy to navigate, given it was the least technical and most hopeful. As soon as he slid into the driver's seat, the first thing he did was rip the rearview mirror from the windshield. The last thing he wanted to see was what happened to him now. He was afraid it might dishearten him, so it just wasn't the time for it. That would come, but later in his journey. Although his vision was good enough for Jeremy to find his way back from Crying Canyon, it was nowhere near good enough for him to safely drive. Nothing was in focus, and everything lacked detail. He simply aimed his truck for the spot with the most light and figured the forest would be the darker areas, so he avoided driving into them. For over 12 miles of winding and treacherous gravel mountain road, Jeremy drove, his hopes and optimism welling up as he got closer and closer to rescue. It had been about 8 hours since Jeremy had been attacked by the Sow Grizzly. He pulled into the remote family-run outfitting company at the Panther River Resort. As he parked his truck and stepped out, resembling something like a low-budget movie zombie, he could see a child's face disappear from the big window in the front of the building. He stumbled over to the door and heard a child say, "Grandma, someone's trying to prank us." The little face he had seen disappear from the window had apparently spent a few seconds in some kind of panic in reaction to Jeremy's appearance, and had decided it was all a joke of some sort. Jeremy immediately explained how he'd been mauled by a bear, and this was no prank. He quickly passed the boy's grandparents his wallet and cell phone, and requested they call his wife and tell her. Jeremy's wife, Joyce, was helping out at a non-profit when her cell phone rang. She was driving, so she ignored it at first. But as it rang, she could see it was coming from an unlisted number. This is frequently how the police call people, so she picked up the call to see what was going on. As their relationship entered previously uncharted waters, Jeremy and Joyce searched for what was their next step. She was wrought with confusion and worry, while he was asking for a glass of room-temperature water with a straw to relieve his thirst. At the Panther River Resort, the family of caretakers did exactly that. They took care of Jeremy by calling for the Shock Trauma Air Rescue Service. STARS, as it's called, is a Canadian nonprofit helicopter air ambulance service operating out of Calgary who transports critically ill or injured people to care. The resort had a planned wedding ceremony at their site scheduled for that day, so the owner helped Jeremy get back into his truck and drive around the backside of the building as they waited for the air ambulance. Jeremy couldn't help but notice that the 18-year-old girl who was helping take care of him would banter with him but never look him in the face. His wounds were overwhelming to her, and he could see it in her behavior toward him. After being told that the STARS service wouldn't be able to respond to Jeremy's predicament within a predictable time frame, the owner of the ranch decided to fly Jeremy to the hospital in his own helicopter. Jeremy tried to get his fishing rod from the back of his truck to try and catch some bull trout while waiting for the rescue to be organized, but was convinced to sit down and rest instead. The young woman rode with Jeremy in her dad's helicopter as he flew them to Sundre and the medical support team waiting there. The entire flight, the young woman continually poked Jeremy in the side to keep him from passing out, while holding a tarp to catch the blood seeping from his wounds. As soon as the helicopter landed, Jeremy could see several blurry shapes of people waiting to help him. When Jeremy said hi to them, they immediately began shuffling and preparing to take care of him. His right leg was now even more stiff than it had been up to this point, and it was propped over a seat in order to fit him into the helicopter. They struggled to remove his large frame from such a tight fit, but Jeremy slowly walked off the helicopter under his own power. Jeremy was loaded into the ambulance and endured another 90-minute ride to a more supportive Calgary hospital. As they drove, one of the doctors had to hold Jeremy's head up and off of the gurney. The crushed portion of his skull was too fragile to bear the bumps and jostling of the drive otherwise. En route, they tried to intubate Jeremy, but weren't sure how to do it, given he was missing his nose and a good portion of his mouth. He was breathing through wound channels torn open between his eyes, and once he was laid flat, he couldn't see anything. Before allowing the medical team to put him under sedation, Jeremy insisted he be allowed to tell his mother and wife goodbye, as he was afraid he might not wake up. He had a nurse place a towel over his head to hide his wounds as he spoke with Joyce. She could see one of his green eyes misplaced and wondered if he would survive. Once he was wheeled away, the medical team completed some x-rays to understand the destruction to his skull and facial bone. They also completed a CAT scan to assess the bleeding on his brain. They blocked his head in place and repositioned his eye to allow him to see better. One of the doctors leaned over Jeremy, and he could see she had green eyes like his. He asked her to hold his hand, and she gladly comforted him. Just before being put under sedation, Jeremy heard a man with an Australian accent reassure him by telling him, "I'm down here at your feet. I got you, buddy," as he rubbed Jeremy's feet to reassure him. Jeremy remembered many details of the procedure. He said he remembered them placing the breathing tube down his throat and was aware as the initial crews stitched up his wounds in his hands and leg. As the surgeons marveled at how tough Jeremy was, they were even more amazed to find out he had done exactly what needed to be done to preserve the tissues torn from his body during the bear attack. The act of placing the severed tissues into the open wounds actually preserved their viability and allowed them to be reattached to his face. The initial surgery lasted 13 hours, but that would not be the only surgery he would have to endure. Jeremy was placed into a medically induced coma for the day to keep him stationary and rest while he healed. The next day Jeremy awoke, but couldn't see anything. He could hardly hear anything. Swelling had made his head feel like a balloon, and undoubtedly concerned his wife and friends who visited him. In some ways, sleep was worse than being awake. Each time he drifted off to sleep, he was terrified back to consciousness by a dream about the attack. It seemed like the trauma from that confrontation would never end. Jeremy was suffering from PTSD from the attack immediately. Each time he would wake up, the hospital staff would try to restrain him, which reinforced the flashback. He imagined it was the bear pinning him down all over again. The medical staff had Jeremy up and walking very soon. They knew he had to move his body to keep his blood circulating and joints articulating, or he might develop complications. Jeremy passed the time by writing Joyce love letters whenever she was absent from his side. When friends visited Jeremy in the hospital, the staff would help him go outside for walks. Each time he saw a bush or a spruce tree or any darker shape, he froze and refused to go near it. He remained in the hospital for 5 weeks, 8 hours, and 23 minutes. And yes, Jeremy kept track of the time. During his stay there, the staff worked on helping him regain basic function in his legs and arm and deal with the mental trauma of the attack. It would probably be no surprise to anyone hearing this story, but Jeremy returned to the scene of his attack 2 days after being released from the hospital. He took Joyce hunting with him. They bagged a couple of birds while out and visited the lodge staff to let them know he was okay. Within a week of being released from the hospital, he went deer hunting with one of his buddies. They ended up bagging a white-tailed doe and a bull elk. Returning to his normal habits and passions was therapeutic for Jeremy, and his wife and friends became his informal therapists and support staff. Joyce laid down some pretty restrictive ground rules for him, though, as a condition of letting him go back into the woods. She said he had to bring a satellite phone with him that would allow him to send texts from anywhere in the world. It was a very moderate and slight concession on her part, but was important to help Jeremy recover. Jeremy went back to work at the beef slaughterhouse 7 weeks after the mauling. He would have flashbacks while at work. One day his sense of smell suddenly returned, and the scent of blood sent him reeling. His psychiatrist recommended he try rapid acceleration treatment, and after a single 45-minute session, he was able to sleep for an entire night for the first time in a long time. Jeremy has continued to push the boundaries on his healing and confronting his fears resulting from the attack by returning to his attack scene every once in a while. Joyce says that the biggest takeaway from this experience is that life is fragile and precious. Jeremy and Joyce now have a greater value for their family and time together, growing closer with each other. Their story together is recounted in a book titled Mauled, Lessons Learned from a Grizzly Bear Attack, and is linked below for your review. On the cover is a picture of Jeremy after his face was reconstructed. The book discussed different aspects of his attacks in much more detail than presented in this episode. If you would like to show support for Jeremy by purchasing his book, I'm sure he would appreciate it. Wow, if you described this story secondhand to me, I wouldn't believe a single word of it. But this story is true, and straight from Jeremy's own account. If any of you are from Calgary and see Jeremy in town, make sure to buy him a beer or two. After reading the details of this attack, I have a few questions for you. Do you think the sow continually returned to attack Jeremy because she could not find her little cub? Would you have been able to grab onto the bear tongue while squeezing sensitive areas of her anatomy to survive? I honestly don't think it would have crossed my mind. How strong do you think a person has to be to have their head and face crushed, but still manage to make it to help? Will you play the song Baby Shark next time you need motivation? Do you think the sow grizzly that attacked Jeremy had PTSD from getting her sensitive bits squeezed so hard? I will gladly read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comment section below and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there. especially in bear country.